Hello and welcome to Slightly Nostalgic. My name is Griff and we are watching Firefly, Episode 1, Serenity, not to be confused with the movie Serenity, which happens after the show. Well, we're starting with the pilot, the two-part pilot that is actually kind of controversial because it wasn't aired first by Fox originally. They started with the second episode because they didn't think it was a very good introduction to the show, and my kind of unpopular opinion on this is that they were right about this. It's not the best pilot, really. I love the episode. There's a lot of moments that I really love that we'll get into, but I feel like it's just kind of too long. It's a two-part episode, and it's nice that it gives them space to introduce all the characters and set things up, but I feel like it's just a little too slow. It stands out from all the other episodes in that regard, and it's just kind of the suspense. A lot of the suspense that is built up doesn't really work for reasons that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So this episode starts out kind of strangely with a flashback that's a war scene, and I have to say it looks cheesy. I thought it looked cheesy the first time I watched it. It still looks cheesy to me today. It's just it's weird because the rest of the show is really, the special effects look really good for the most part in the rest of the show. The action scenes look really good. The camera work is great. Everything is really good. And in this scene, which unfortunately it's meant to be the introduction to the show, it doesn't look very good. I don't know exactly what it is. It just looks like a soundstage, and I don't know. I didn't buy it. It didn't look like a real war to me. I didn't like it. Another thing that's kind of weird about how this episode starts is that since it's a flashback, where we don't see Serenity, we don't see most of the characters that are going to be in the show, and I think it's probably pretty disorienting for people. Like, it's a weird way to start the series. It's a cool scene. It's cool that it gives backstory to Mal and Zoe, and kind of you find out later that this particular battle is really important to those two characters. But I don't know that we needed to start out with that. Alright, so after the battle scene, we flash back to the present, which I guess is our future, but it's the present for the show, and they're in space kind of doing a run-of-the-mill pirating, looting kind of operation on this derelict ship or whatever. So they're all in spacesuits, and the first thing that I noticed here is that there's no sound in space. Like, I knew this already, of course, but it just really jumps out at you in this show. Every time I watch this show, it's something that really jumps out because it's like, it sets it apart from other science fiction, and I really, really like this about this show. Like, most science fiction movies and TV shows will add sound into space, even though everybody knows there's no sound in space, just to kind of like up the action and make it more exciting and everything, but Firefly doesn't need to do that. It chooses to give you a totally different feeling of the space scenes, and I love the music they use during it. They really bring out the Western kind of theme in the space scenes with guitar music and things like that. And I think it just works really well for the show. Another thing that kind of jumped out at me this time that never really has before is that they say the word humped a lot in this scene and in this episode in general, and I don't think they ever say it again after that. It's like, it's one of those weird pilot things where like they're trying something out and then they just either forget to put it in the actual show after that, or they just decide they didn't like it. I don't know. As soon as they all got back on the ship, there's a lot of kind of establishing shots of the layout of the ship, and I was just kind of reminded of how awesome this set is. It's a beautiful set, the interior of Serenity. Like, a lot of sci-fi will just have generic hallways and command rooms and things like that, but Serenity was actually designed to be like a real ship layout. It's kind of like a big RV where there's like a kitchen and an engine room and the bridge and the quarters and like the infirmary and all of that. And it's just really cool. They put so much attention to detail in this thing and make it look really lived in. It's just an awesome set. Oh, a random line that is referenced in this episode that actually affects things later on. I'm not going to spoil anything with this series. I won't give you any major spoilers past the episode we're currently talking about, but I do want to kind of point out when things are referenced later. or things that get carried on throughout the show. And at one point, Kaylee says something about a compression coil. Now they need to pick up a new one, and there's kind of like this little argument with Mal about how they need a new one, and he's like, well, we can't afford one, and that comes up later on. That's very important. I just like that they put things like that in there, and then they remembered to call back to it later. Shortly after that, we get Simon's introduction, and his introduction is very weird because they're trying to make you think he's the villain the whole time. He's introduced with like over the top, he's got sunglasses, and there's this, the background music is like he gets his own villain music and things like that. He's supposed to be really ominous and mysterious and kind of sinister. Of course, for people who watched it live, and for me, because I didn't watch this episode first, I knew he wasn't a bad guy, so it was weird. And of course, he's got the box with him that we know River is inside, and really, if you're paying much attention to the opening theme, you know there's a girl inside it. So that suspense is kind of ruined, which is a major problem with this episode in general. So much of it hinges on you thinking one thing about Simon and not knowing what's in the box, and that's just kind of ruined for most people who watch it anyway. Once all the characters were together and interacting with each other, I just started to get a whole lot of nostalgia for this show, because that's really the best part of the show, is all the relationships between the characters, and a lot of that stuff is set up right here in this episode. Like Kaylee flirting with Simon, and Simon being all shy about it. That gets set up here. There's a lot of tension between Mal and Jane that, of course, builds, and things happen with that later in the season. Oh, and earlier on, there is a scene with Wash talking to Zoe about how Wash is kind of jealous of Mal. Like, Zoe is very loyal to Mal, but Wash is her husband, and they have a good relationship, but it's like this point of tension between them. I actually had forgotten that that was originally set up in this episode, so that was pretty cool. Okay, so another random line that jumped out at me was this weird moment that I never really paid much attention to before with Shepherd Book. It's the moment when Mal finds out there's a mole, and he thinks it's Simon, so he goes and he punches Simon, and he's like, what are you doing? Why are you telling the feds about us, or whatever? And then Shepherd Book like walks out of the shadows, and he's like, I believe you've got the wrong man, or something like that. And it's a weird line. I never really thought about it before, but like, is this some kind of hint toward what Shepherd Book's past might be? Like, it's never really revealed in the show. I think it's been revealed in comics and things like that, but you pretty much get the idea by the end of the show of, okay, well, you kind of get, I don't want to say what it is because I don't want to spoil anything, but you get the idea of what's going on with him. But this moment in particular, I never thought about it before, but is this Shepherd Book under the impression that Mal is actually looking for him? Does he think, when he says you've got the wrong man, does he think that he is the right man? Because right after that, Lawrence, the actual lawman, jumps out, and then it all goes down. Everybody knows what's going on. But there's that weird little moment that I always just kind of assumed it was like, oh, Book knows who the lawman is. So he's like, no, Mal, you've got this wrong. But this could be more than that. This could be the first big hint at what Shepherd Book's past actually is. We have some hints that he's more than just a preacher earlier on, because he knows a lot about spaceships and things like that. But I think this might be the first foreshadowing, really, of something more specific of what's going on with Shepherd Book. I could be wrong, though. Another notable moment in this episode that I really love is after the shootout, when most of the people are dead, the shootout they have on Whitefall, and Patience is kind of taking cover behind her horse, and Mal just kind of looks at her, and he just like, bam, just shoots the horse. And it's like this big subversion of expectations. It's a kind of a trope killer. It's really funny. I like it. I mean, it's sad the horse dies, but it's a cool moment. But I have always thought this was kind of weird, because first of all, why is Patience taking cover behind a horse and not just shooting? Why wouldn't she like take cover behind the horse and then shoot? Why is she back there being like, don't move, Mal, or whatever she says? That doesn't make sense. It also doesn't make sense why Mal doesn't just shoot her. Like, she's right there. They're like 20 feet away from each other. Like, why aren't they shooting? I don't think real shootouts happen like this, where one guy's just standing out in the open and one's taking cover but not shooting. I don't know. It's just a weird setup. It's kind of strange. But it is a cool moment. And then, he leans over and he's just like, I do the job and then I get paid. And it's like, oh, yeah, Mal, finally they win one. Like, it's really cool. And then shortly after that is the moment that made me love this show. Even though I had already seen episode 2 and then I watched this. And at that point, I liked this show. It was just like a fun show to watch with my friends. But this moment is the one that I was like, oh, this show is really something special. It's the scene where Simon and the lawman are kind of in a standoff in the spaceship, and the lawman has a gun to River's head, and Simon has a gun on the lawman, and they're just like waiting, and it's all tense. And then the others get back from what they were doing, and Mal just like without a second thought just walks up and just shoots the lawman in the head, and they just keep going. He's like, I don't have time to deal with this. We're running away from Reavers right now. Just shoot the bad guy, get him out of here, let's go. It's something they do a lot in this show that I really love, where they'll set up a very familiar TV scenario and then do the exact opposite of what every other show does. It's so awesome. Something I have kind of a new appreciation for after this particular viewing is Simon's character. He really is set up to be kind of like this wimpy, big city dandy kind of character. He's all soft-spoken and polite, but when it really comes down to it, he's got courage. Like, this guy is not weak at all, and they even say that at the end. Mal is like, you ain't weak and that ain't nothing. It's something that really jumped out at me more watching it this time, especially knowing what he has just been through exactly to get River out, and just how this guy has risked everything he has. He's given up this awesome life that he had, and all to save his sister. Like, he's a hero saving his sister like that, and his only mission in life is to keep her safe. And one thing that really highlighted this for me that I never really thought about before is when Kaylee gets shot earlier in the episode, and he basically uses that as a bargaining chip to keep himself and River safe on the ship instead of giving them to the feds. And that was just something that's like, that's a little ruthless. Like, you don't usually think of Simon as that kind of guy, but he does what he needs to do to protect his sister. And there's some nice moments with his sister, and it shows the bond between them, and I really like that relationship. Some of it is probably like Simon. I kind of feel like of all the characters, I'm the most like Simon, and I have a little sister, so maybe that's why this just gets to me a little bit. But it's cool that I can watch it after all this time and still really care about these characters. And that is pretty much it for this episode. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if there's anything you think that could change about the format of this, or if you have any suggestions or whatever. Feedback is always great. And I would encourage you to watch along with me, and we can talk about episode 2 very soon. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Okay, bye.